Alrighty. Well, tonight we're going to talk, like I said, about some of the different ways God's communicated to humans, to the world. And, if you're talking to people about the Lord, or if you had conversations with people, I mean, of course, I'm on a campus or college campuses. So of course, this is an ongoing discussion where I am all the time. But, believe it or not, many people don't really know the different ways that God has decided to communicate with humanity. They may have some assumptions, may say, I just can't know. I don't know. I don't know if God's there. I don't know how I can know. I don't know how to have knowledge of God. I don't know. Seems like this God's just the gap between humans and God is just too big. If God exists, he's just too mighty and infinite and too omniscient and too big and too powerful. And there's just no way we could know anything about this God or whatever God they've come up with their mind. Somehow they've created a God in their own minds. And then, for us as Christians or us as followers of Jesus, we every Sunday, if we go to a church or go to a fellowship somewhere, wherever it is, we tend to have a pastor who opens up the Bible, and we kind of take for granted, obviously we think God communicates through the text, through the Bible, and that's it. Maybe that's just something that's in a starting point, our assumption, but of course a lot of people around us don't start with that assumption. So we need to expand a little bit here tonight and think about some of the different ways God communicates to us. Now, the God question, of course, is one of the most debated questions of all time, one of the most popular questions of all time. It's going to be debated till we're long gone. That's one of our favorite questions to ask on a college campus. We do get a lot of yeses, believe it or not. We still get some no's and some I don't knows, but we do get a fair amount of yeses. And then of course our question back to people is, well, why do you say yes? Why do you think God exists? So that leads to another conversation. Just like when they say no, we say, well, how is it you don't know? Why do you say no? Or they say, I don't know. Perhaps we might say to them, well, how would you know? How could you know if God exists, right? So, this is a good question. We've had a lot of success with talking to people about this question, this specific question. So, having said that, God's existence, whether God exists, really is the question of all questions. It impacts our whole lives. It impacts the way we view reality. It impacts how we define and attain knowledge, how we know things. It certainly impacts our morality, our moral choices, our ethical choices. It impacts our view of humanity, where we think about where we came from, where did we come from, how did we get here. That plays a huge role in how we view the world around us and how we view humans. Also impacts, of course, our destiny, where we think we're going when we die, where are we headed as the human race? Or, of course, how do we explain, what's wrong with humans? Why do humans act a certain way? Why can they do incredibly moral things and kind and compassionate things, but yet do the most barbaric things, do things that are just unbelievable, things that you just want to, when you turn on the news, you just makes you want to cry at times, right? And why is there suffering, evil in the world? Why does the world seem like it's off? It's not what it should be. Seems like there's some sort of plan that isn't being played out at times. There's something, a better plan that we should be adhering to. And why is there so much suffering, evil? So the question of whether God exists impacts all these questions are tied up with whether God exists, tied into the question of God's existence. So, for somebody to say, well, I'm too busy to think about God's existence, or I'm pretty happy the way I am, where I'm at. I don't need to deal with this. I'm making a lot of money. I've got a successful family. I've got a good retirement. I look good. I feel good. I'm in a good relationship. I've got a lot of stuff. My political party's winning everything. Politics are going the way I want. Whatever it is, none of those things have anything to do with whether God exists or not. 0.0. God can still exist whether or not you're happy, whether or not you make a lot of money or make no money, whether or not you have good health or bad health, whether or not you have a great relationship or bad relationship, whether or not your family is doing fantastic or poor or whatever, or struggling. God's existence doesn't have anything to do with that, really, because God existed long before you came into the world, and whether he exists or not is an objective question. Okay, it's not based on how you feel. It's not based on whether you feel the need. It's based on whether God exists in reality, and that's a claim we're making. Something that's outside yourself. God's an objective entity. Okay, your emotions don't create God. Your feelings don't make God exist. Okay, so just remember that, because we have a lot of struggle today with objective truth. If you might have noticed, most people don't know what it is anymore. They think their feelings or emotions determine reality, and that's a pretty scary place, but that's where we are at as a culture. And there's no doubt that, as this book Good Arguments talks about, making your case in writing and public speaking, that whatever claim we make, the more divisive the claim, the more whether it be an issue of God's existence, a political issue, an ethical issue, these are big claims and issues that are very divisive at times. And that's why we need good, well thought out, intentional reasons for our claims, right? We need to be able to make, good reason, or give good reasons and good arguments for what we're talking about. Okay. And that's obviously not happening a lot of times. A lot of times we see a lot of appeals to emotion, and people make, and emotional appeals to emotion are not arguments. It's not that emotions are relevant, but it's just that those do not form the base of a good argument. Okay. So sometimes we need to remember that everybody has presuppositions. That means that they might believe things, or they might assume things in advance. They just believe things automatically without providing a reason for it, right? Something you may just take for granted, right? When I go back to this question here, and I ask people how they say they know God exists, and they say yes, a lot of times they say to me, well, I was just raised that way. I've always believed in God. I just have always believed it. Now, I mean, that's something that they're saying. They've kind of just taken it for granted, that God exists. It's not that they're wrong. It's not that they can't assume that. The problem is that that assumption may be challenged once they get out and start talking to people about it, right? They're going to have to provide some reasons for their presuppositions, right? So now our presuppositions, our starting points as Bible followers and devout followers of Jesus, of course, we have some starting points. Most believers that sit in pews on Sundays or sit in a congregational setting, wherever you are, start with the assumption the God of the Bible is the one true God, that he does miracles. He reveals himself in some way, right? He shows who he is. And of course, he reveals himself through the Messiah. The Bible's a word of God, and God speaks through a text. That's the main way God communicates to humanity, is through a written text. That's what some of our presuppositions are. And that's fine. But like I said, once you get out in the culture and start talking to people, those presuppositions will be challenged. Okay. Not everybody holds to your presuppositions. Okay. If you've never encountered that, then probably you just have never shared your faith with someone or never been challenged. I don't know, but that generally is the case. It will happen. You will be challenged. I mean, if you had, a Muslim or a Mormon, try to convert you to Mormonism or Islam based on their scriptures, would you become a Mormon or a Muslim? When I have a Muslim try to use the Quran on me, I don't accept it as an authority. So I can't get on the same page with them, because my starting point's different. See, I don't accept the Quran as a revelation from God, because I don't think Muhammad got a revelation 700 AD, and I don't think that the Quran came from God. I think it's a man-made book. Okay. There's too many problems with the Quran. It says the Messiah never actually died in physical reality. That's a huge problem, because there's too much evidence Jesus really died. And so you just have to understand that, that's the way sometimes people view us when we try to use the Bible with them. Sometimes, not all the time. Same thing with Mormonism as well. I'm not going to become a Mormon because I don't think the Book of Mormon is a factual record. I think it's mostly fictional. Okay, so just something you got to think about when you think about your presuppositions. Okay. Now, the question you want to ask is, how should God, if God exists, how should he give knowledge of himself to humanity? What should God do? This is a great question to ask people. I don't know if there's a God. I'm kind of agnostic. I just don't know. I'm not sure if I can know. I'm busy. How could you possibly know? Well, maybe ask him. What should God do? What should God do to communicate to humanity? If God wants us to know what He is like, what should He do? Okay, what should He do? I mean, after all, if we think that God is a immaterial being, meaning that He's not composed of any kind of matter, form, substance, it's not composed of anything, how should an immaterial being communicate with a material world, right? Because the world is material and we are material beings, we're physical beings, and God doesn't fit into that category. Now, you could take the analogy of human communication, because when you guys form relationships with people, every relationship you've ever had and are having or trying to have started with communication. You communicated something, you picked a way to communicate to that person, or they picked a way to communicate to you. Could be email, could be texting, could be talking to you verbally in person, could be you're introduced to somebody, could be some other way, but you had to communicate, right? There was no relationship formed without initiation, right? Without communication. Hopefully, we initiate the relationship, the person received the communication, right? And they wanted that relationship. Sometimes they don't. There's different kinds of communication. There's verbal communication. That's where obviously we actually engage with people, speaking with others through words, right? There's nonverbal communication. Sometimes that's just body language and tone. Some people say, "Oh, your body language speaks of volumes." If you're married, you hear that all the time. Your body language is telling me something else, right? Written communication. We have written communication like emails, texting, books, letters, things like that. We have listening. Then we have visual communication. That's where sometimes as humans we use imagery. We might use a drawing, something we've made to communicate something. Look at the painting I've made. Look at the picture I've made. Look at this sculpture I've made. Look at this. And that's how we communicate to people, right? And people can come to know what we're like. They can learn some things about us. So there's no relationships without communication. And these kinds of communication around us every day, no doubt about it. So if you think about God, God is going to have to do something, pick some way to communicate to humanity. He's got to pick a medium to communicate. That's why we think about whether God exists. You just need to think about, well, how should this God communicate to humanity? What's He going to do? What initiation is He going to take if He wants humans to come to know what He's like, and He wants them to know what His plans for them are? Now, it's true that just like in human relationships, some people don't want to receive the communication. You guys know that there's probably been people that have tried to initiate relationships with you over the years, and some of the people you've ignored them. Some of the people you just blew them off. Some people you may have just stopped communicating with, or they stopped communicating with you and the relationship kind of ended. Or maybe you just never got into the relationship because you never responded, right? Maybe you knew something about that person. You said, "Oh, you know what? I've heard about that person. I just don't want to respond to that initiation of them to want to communicate with me." So that's just the way communication works. And of course, humans can ignore what God has communicated to them. They can ignore God's mediums that He picks to communicate to them. They can willfully ignore them, right? So remember that whatever God is, what kind of being is God? That He's an immaterial being, right? He's not a physical being. That's the nature of what He is, His essence. We're physical, right? That determines how we know what God is like. That means God's going to have to pick that medium. He's going to have to pick a way to communicate to us. He's the one that determines how we come to know Him. Okay? And like I said, some people assume that God is similar. Sadly, I mean not sadly, just because everything around us is physical and we're used to using our five senses all the time, that we assume sometimes God's supposed to be like a material object. He's supposed to be physical. He's supposed to have composition. He was put together by something else. He has parts. Why isn't He like a car or a house or something? Everything I see in my room right now, I can see it, verify it with my own eyes. I can physically touch it. I can smell things. I can taste things. I can taste this water, know what water is like, right? So the point is, a lot of people assume God's supposed to fit into that category, like as a physical object, but God doesn't. Okay, that's why what we believe in is obviously called biblical revelation. Um, Not the book of Revelation I'm talking about, although that is related somewhat. But revelation, of course, is a disclosure of something that's been hidden. Okay, it's revealing knowledge of something that was not known. Just like when you guys reveal yourself to people, they didn't know what you were like, right? Before you spoke, before you communicate, they didn't know what your character was like. They didn't know you, your personality. You revealed yourself to that person, right? You chose to reveal yourself. And the reason God has to do this, why he has to pick a medium to reveal himself to humanity, is because we are dead and blinded and bound to sin. We're dead in our sins. We don't naturally find God. And God has to set the parameters as how he's going to reveal himself to humans, right? So we have some barriers between us and God. We don't go to God naturally. Some of us don't want to be morally accountable to God. We run from God. Romans 1 talks about people don't want to recognize his creation, as we know, as we'll talk about. So humans, quite frankly, sometimes repel the thought of God, as we know. Okay? So if God is if we have these gaps where between us and God, where God is a self-existing, eternal, powerful being, and we are dependent, feeble, and temporal, meaning that we're temporary beings, we don't live forever here. We're also limited in our capacity to know and understand. We're finite. And we're also not morally able to relate to God correctly, because God is a perfectly morally and holy being, right? So there's some barriers that exist between us and God. We've got some gaps, and God has to help us, has to provide the way to bridge these gaps, okay? And all your faith is, in all honesty, faith, which is really trust, is what faith is in the Bible. It's trust, trusting, fidelity or commitment. That's what it means. Your faith is a response to the knowledge God has revealed to us about himself, his plans, intentions for humanity. You respond to the knowledge God has given to you, okay? So faith is not divorced from knowledge. And like you don't know anything. Just like people say, faith is belief. It's just belief. You don't know anything. You don't really know anything. There's no way to know it. I mean, God, you could know God exists, and there's no way to know. They're basically saying that you don't have knowledge of God. There's no way to really know. You just take a step of faith, a leap of faith. You just hope for the best, right? No. Faith or trust is a response to the knowledge God has revealed to us. And we're going to look at some of the ways God has given us knowledge of himself, okay? One way God has given knowledge of himself is definitely through visual communication, meaning that he uses imagery and communicates through the things he has made. You can look around the world and you should be able to observe certain things and reason back to the fact that God is behind those things. That is what, technically, it is a way of using your senses. I mean, you should be able to use your eyes, touch. I don't know if you really taste. Well, some things. I mean, but if you might appreciate certain foods, maybe they point to God. If I eat a Hershey's white chocolate bar, I might say, "Oh, this is heavenly. There must be a God." The point is, sometimes when you're out in nature, and obviously you're out in the physical world, sometimes you are using your five senses to see what God has created, and it's impacting you. So remember, God is a spirit. As far as we know, everything about God, he can't be limited to a physical body. Otherwise, he couldn't be omnipresent in all places at once, right? Now, when Jesus was here, Jesus took on a physical nature, right? He's the only member of the Trinity that took on a physical nature, and he was limited in some ways because he had a physical nature and he was on this earth, right? He couldn't be more than one place at once because he had a physical body, right? So he was somewhat limited. That's because he took on a human nature. Doesn't mean he didn't have the God nature too, but he also accepted human limitations when he took on a human nature, right? He had to go to the bathroom. He had to eat. He could get tired. He was tempted. Some of the same things we experience, right? So if God is infinite, an infinite being, or he's a spirit, then he's going to have to pick some ways to communicate. One of the main ways that we can know he communicates is through cause and effect. You guys experience cause and effect around you all day long. You see the effects of something, you know, there's a cause behind it. If I drop this water bottle on the floor, the effect was the water bottle hit the floor. I'm the cause of this water bottle hitting the floor. My arm moved and I dropped it. I'm the cause, right? There is a track right here on my desk called Contradict. All religions can't be true. The effect is the track. Somewhat we know this is the effect. What's the cause? The cause is the author, Andy Wasserman, who wrote this and designed this, right? This didn't, all the wording on here and all the design just didn't happen naturalistically. It wasn't caused by an unguided process. It took an intelligent mind to design this track and make this track, okay? So you see cause and effect around you everywhere. So how do we know God exists? You know God exists, one of the ways you know is through the effects, his effects, okay? You know God exists through the effects. He's left effects all around you, okay? What are some of those effects that you can see and we have observed? Yes, we've observed them with our telescopes, with our own eyes. And of course, on a daily basis, sometimes we can observe these things. Well, we know the universe exists. The universe had a beginning, a space, and space, time, and matter came into existence at a beginning point. We know that in cosmology. So if the universe had a beginning and it came into existence, it does need a cause. Most things that you know around you do not have a cause. Okay, generally things don't pop into existence on their own. I know this water bottle didn't get here, didn't just pop to existence on my table. Also, the universe is precisely set up for life to get going on Earth. If it wasn't set up precisely for life to get going on Earth, you and I wouldn't be talking on this Zoom call. It has to be a certain kind of universe. It has to be planned out way ahead of time. It has to be planned out just right so the life can get going on Earth. And it also has to be set up for number 3, so that you get an Earth that is set to support and sustain life as well. It can't be just any old Earth. It has to be an Earth that is set up to support and sustain life. But you don't get that kind of Earth until you get the right kind of universe. So those things have to be planned out. If you think you've done a lot of planning in your life, planning your education, retirement, health, all those things, government tries to plan things. They fail, of course. But the point is that the kind of planning that we try to do, multiply that of what it would take to plan out a universe ahead of time and plan out an Earth to get life going on Earth. That takes some foreknowledge, some insight, right? We also observe that humans have a DNA, or you have an instruction manual, which is really your DNA. It tells the cell what to do. It's a blueprint for the human cell. That is really the same thing as a written instruction manual. Well, instruction manuals only come from an intelligent mind. Instruction manuals don't come from any natural cause. Every instruction manual that I have ever had for anything I've bought came from a mind. We also we observe that humans can use the laws of logic. The laws of logic were in the fabric of reality. Aristotle discovered them and codified them. And that's how we're able to even reason about anything. You use logic every day of your life. Some of us don't do it well. Some others do it really well. But the point is that humans just suddenly discovered that, hey, there's the laws of logic just out there. They're just in the fabric of reality. Why don't we use them? Nice, right? Where'd those come from? Also, we see that humans have consciousness. Consciousness is not a material thing. It's a part of humanity, a part of a human that you can't see directly. Some people think it's equivalent of your soul. That's what the soul is. But if you have a consciousness in humans, most likely you came from a conscious being, not from a non-conscious piece of matter. Not that a lifeless piece of matter gave rise to consciousness. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Humans also have moral knowledge. We've noticed that humans seem to care a lot about their moral values and moral duties. Talk about that more. We also observe that humans spend a lot of time fighting for other humans, what they consider to be inequality, justice, and human rights. They really believe humans have great value. Why do we do that? What's the cause of that? We see the effects of that, but what's behind that? Where'd that come from? We see that people also live as if they have major existential needs. Existential needs are the big questions. They care about meaning and purpose. They care about death. They care about love and significance and all those things. The big existential needs. Why am I here? Where am I going? Purpose, meaning. Those are big existential questions. And of course, we see the effects of Jesus. He's the most influential human being that's ever lived. We see his effects on humanity. If he had never been born, the world would look quite different than what it is now. So the point is that if you want to know one of the main ways you know there's a God, you look at his effects, and then you reason back to a cause. What is the cause of that, right? You see you see the effect, the resulting action. What is the cause? Now, the question becomes, you got two possibilities. You could say that these effects are explained by an intelligent personal God, a personal God meaning that this God has rationality, he's self-conscious, he has volition, he has a will, he exercises his will, makes choices. That's the same kind of qualities as a person. Or you could just say, well, you know what, maybe there is no God. Maybe just everything can be accounted for by an undirected natural process. There's no mind, no intelligence, no creator, and a blind, unguided natural process gave rise to the universe, gave rise to first life, gave rise to conscious human beings, gave rise to humans that care about morality, all those things. Those are the two possible explanations. Now, I think you guys hopefully have read Romans 1, where Paul talks about God's existence is, of course, clear as day. The humans can perceive he's there through what he's made, right? Through the things that have been made. Paul says, you don't need the Bible to know there's a creator. You do not need the Bible. I believed in a creator long before I read the Bible. I looked up in my neighborhood growing up. I looked at the sky. I looked at the sun. I observed nature, and I said, there has to be a God. It was so clear to me. And a lot of people do believe in God. Now, that's not good enough. You need to definitely deal with the Messiah and who Jesus is. But you could observe through the world around you, the natural world, what Paul says, you could observe that God's eternal. There's a powerful God. He's a personal God. He made things. He's creative. He's a moral being. You could know some things about God by observing the world around you, but you're not going to be able to know everything about God that way. There's some things you're not going to know, but you can know some of the basics. So obviously, like I said, we're dealing with visual communication. There's another way God uses visual communication, and that's our observation of humans. When we look at humans, we can see that they demonstrate they're made in the image of a moral being, okay? They show this, humans show this because they appeal to a moral law every day of their lives. Happens every day. I turn on the news, happens all around me. The people think moral positions matter. They believe a moral law is being violated. They believe that moral positions are the thing to fight for in their lives. People say all the time, they'll say, well, this isn't fair. That's not fair. That's not right. I want justice. That's morally wrong. That's evil. What the heck is wrong with people? We say these kinds of things every day. Okay, it's part of our moral reactions to things we see on TV. We look at the news. Perhaps something has happened to us personally. We've been morally violated, or a friend's been violated. Something, but we say these things a lot. Humans, you can probably find someone will say one of these every day. When this incident happened 2 summers ago, and this incident happened in the spring during the Oscars, which I haven't watched in eons and eons of years. I could care less about the Oscars anymore. But I remember hearing the news that, people, the way they react to certain things, they show that a moral law is being violated. There's some sort of moral law they're appealing to, okay? If they didn't think a moral law is being violated, they wouldn't react the way they do. They sometimes react violently. They burn down cities, burn down people's businesses, hurt other people, take it out on other people. Okay, just depends on what it is. But This issue right here. We just had the Roe decision was made on Friday. You have all these people protesting. They think it's morally wrong that Roe was reversed. They think it's morally wrong. They're morally outraged. You can see in their moral reactions. There's a moral law of some kind that's being violated, and they don't like it. Okay? That's happening everywhere. So you look at their moral reactions. If you look at the basic moral argument about abortion, I'm not going to spend the whole time on abortion, but Carla did that topic 3 weeks ago. If you missed it, go to my YouTube channel. It's on there. Premise 1, it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills innocent human beings. Conclusion, abortion is morally wrong. But what we see right now is people think it's a constitutional right to kill an innocent human being. You are morally wrong for saying otherwise. See, they're appealing to a moral law. Even though there's nothing in the entire Constitution that says people can have an abortion. There's nowhere in the Constitution even says that, but people don't read the Constitution, so they don't know. But I've heard on the news the last 3 days, it's a constitutional right from people that say they know the law and they're constitutional experts, but I guess they've never read the Constitution. That's a whole other topic. Anyway, so you see people complain. They seem to know the difference between what is fair and unfair. They seem to know the difference between what is just and unjust. They seem to know the difference between what is morally right and morally wrong. And they seem to see some sort of difference between good and evil. People complain too much about moral positions not to act like they know these things, okay? So they seem to be appealing to some kind of standard that's being violated. There's a standard that measures good and bad and right and wrong. The question is, where does the standard come from that they're appealing to? They keep appealing to some kind of moral law that's being violated, but where does that moral law come from? Is there an authority or something that is imposed as standard? Is there somewhere you can get that standard from? Do you get it from your conscience? Is your conscience is being violated? Conscience isn't an outside force, right? Conscience is a inward capacity that God has placed within humans to provide moral restraint, that we're able intuitively to know some things are right or wrong. We don't need a 20-week class to know intuitively that that's wrong. We can look at something and say that is wrong. Okay, God has given us a gift, but we don't. Unfortunately, humans have suppressed their conscience, right? And they are suppressing their conscience. Of course, believers can do that as well. Conscience is universal, okay? Paul talks about this in Romans 2. You don't even need the Bible to know this as well. All humans show they seem to have a moral law they're appealing to. The law is written on their hearts. Paul talks about this. The Jews have the written law, which is the Torah, the law of God. The Gentile nations, the pagan nations or non-Jewish nations, not necessarily all pagan, but the point is that the Gentiles have the gift of a moral law written on their hearts, their conscience, and they reject their conscience, of course. Lewis once said, C.S. Lewis, still one of those popular authors to this day, his books sell in the millions, he said that my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What is I comparing the universe, this universe with when I called it unjust? So people seem to know there's a straight line and they know it's crooked. They're appealing to these things. Where does it come from? Does this standard they're appealing to, does it come from society? Does it come from yourself? Do you create your own standard? Whose standard? Is it my standard versus your standard? If you say abortion is morally right and I say it's morally wrong, what standard are we appealing to? Is it just our subjective opinion? Or are we appealing to a transcendent creator that sets a standard? Remember, if there's no moral law, there's no moral grounds for disagreement over someone's actions, okay? And without a moral law, you can't judge one society as morally right or morally wrong, okay? You have to appeal to something, and where does that moral law come from? Also, the moral disagreements people have points to the fact that they really care about their moral values such as love, justice, mercy, whatever your values are, moral values, love, justice, mercy, there's a bunch of them. And you also, people seem to care about their moral duties, what they ought to do. You ought not to do this, you ought to do that, right? They're more obligated to do this, they're more obligated not to do that. People seem to appeal to their moral values and moral duties every day. And remember that if there's no objective morality, then everybody's moral positions are based on their subjective opinions, okay? Objective means something that's independent of your opinion. If I like mint chocolate chip ice cream, that's a subjective preference, right? If you like vanilla, that's a subjective preference. It's not an objective claim, right? My favorite team is the Dallas Cowboys, and they keep blowing it every season. That's my subjective preference, right? It's my subjective opinion that they might win the Super Bowl this year. Okay, who cares? But the point is that most people don't realize that they do appeal to an objective standard outside themselves. Okay? I mean, think about it. If there's no objective morality, then you could go back here. If they say you're wrong about your position on Roe, you're wrong about abortion, that is just their subjective opinion. Okay? That is really just a matter of their preference, right? If there's an objective moral law, that means that they would have to say they're making an objective claim, an objective moral claim. But where does that objective standard come from? Where does the moral law come from if it doesn't come from God? Okay? So the way the argument goes is objective moral values and duties are valid and independent of human opinion. If a personal God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist, but objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore personal God exists. Also, everybody seems to care about people. We observe this, that people think humanity is sacred, human dignity matters, rights matter, value matters, okay? Everybody is appealing to some sort of view of humans, that they really matter, and that points back to the fact they're either not recognizing it or they don't know that people are creating the image and likeness of God, and they're borrowing from our worldview. They're not seeing it. That's why, as I said to an atheist one day, she asked me if I thought Black Lives Matter. I said, why does anyone matter? On your worldview, if you're an atheist, why does anyone matter? Really? If you're just a random, undirected chance accident, is just going to end up going back to the earth one day. Nothing you do here is going to have any lasting significance. Not to mention that you're just the result of chemicals in motion, or you're just chemicals in motion right now. You're a meat machine. What makes you so valuable as a human if God does not exist? And why do you fight for other humans if God does not exist? Why does anyone matter? You know, if we say that women have rights and everyone is equal and people want to fight for these rights, where do human rights come from? Okay, where does human dignity come from? You know, people just pour themselves into these things. They fight for abortion rights and same-sex marriage rights and welfare and contraceptives and all kinds of things, gender rights, transgender rights, and all this right and that right. It's my rights, it's my body. They may say, well, government gives us our rights. Our laws are the basis of our rights. Oh, really? Well, if that's the case, then I hate to see what happens if government takes away your rights or government goes out of existence, because then I guess you don't have any rights, huh? No. Human laws only recognize God-given rights, okay? That's what human laws do. They recognize the God-given rights that are not based in government, right? Okay? What does that say right there? We hold to these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? And the question is, if God does not exist, why do humans have any intrinsic value? That means that you have value regardless of your skin color, what you can do, how much money you make, whether you have a disability, whether you're productive, whether you're successful or not on your status, not on any of that stuff. Intrinsic value means you matter because God has endowed that on humanity. They're his one of the primary pinnacles of creation, right? And so we have intrinsic value if God exists. If God doesn't exist, then you might think someone matters and I might think they don't matter. It's based on your opinion, right? Back to human opinion again. So look at the options. I mean, either we have intrinsic value and dignity and rights because we bear the image of a personal God, or else we are the result. We are an accident of nature, and we're the higher form of an animal, and the highest authority we have is to each other in science. Okay? So otherwise, we just go ahead and assign people rights based on maybe what their productivity level is, or where they live, or what they can do or can't do. It's going to be completely subjective, right? If God does not exist. So remember, though, the way God reveals himself through creation and a moral law, that is only partial knowledge of what God is like. You cannot understand everything about God through those mediums. You're never going to know God as a triune being through just studying the things of creation and appreciating his handiwork behind the universe and the design of the DNA code and the design of the universe. You need God to give you more knowledge to understand that he is a triune being, right? And who Jesus is, right? You need God to do something more to communicate that knowledge, and that's what he does. God decides to communicate through a text. He picks a written text, and he picks a person who is a spokesperson for him, and that, of course, is Jesus. And we can see and hear this person. That's what at least people in the first century did. They got to see him and hear him, and they wrote down what he said. So God picks he picks verbal communication. He speaks through a person in a text, and he picks visual communication when he brought Jesus in this world, right? Both of these mediums. So we need to ask ourselves where God has spoken in history. And of course, people bring up the issue of, well, you have all these different religions. I get asked this actually regularly on campus. Let's say, what makes you think you have the right one? And why do you think yours is different? Why is yours better than these other ones? Why? These people are raised in these countries. That's all they know. It's all they know is Islam. They're raised in Saudi Arabia. That's all they know. They're raised in a Jewish background. That's all they know. They're raised Buddhist. They're raised Hindu. That's all they know. And how can you say yours is better than theirs, or yours is right and theirs is wrong? So, the way I respond to this is, well, let me mention Christopher Hitchens' objection. So Chris Hitchens was a very famous atheist. He passed away about 5 or 6 years ago with cancer. But he said this in his book in 2009. He was really, really hard on Christianity. He just always tried to point at the evils of Christianity. But he said here, since all these revelations, many of them hopelessly inconsistent, cannot be simultaneously true, it must follow that some of them are false and illusory. It could also follow only one of them is authentic. But in the first place, this seems dubious. In the second place, it appears to necessitate religious war in order to decide whose revelation is the true one. Well, that's kind of poor reasoning. That's not true. It is true that there are some contradictions between the faiths. They do make different truth claims. I agree. Of course they do. But, is there really no way to know if God has revealed himself through historical events? We just can't know. Is that right? We can't possibly look at the historical context of the claim and study the evidence. We can't look at the documents and the witnesses and the events and the textual reliability. We can't do that, according to Chris. It's just not possible. Of course we can. We can look at all the textual evidence and look at all those scenes, compare all 5 of these here, and look at who has the better evidence. Okay, and what's the claim? Well, we know Christianity and Messianic Judaism say that Jesus is the Son of God. They think he's God incarnate. They think that he died and rose from the dead. He's the Jewish Messiah. He's the Messiah of the whole world. Islam says Jesus is just a prophet. He didn't die. Judaism says Jesus is either a false prophet or just another rabbi or teacher, famous sage or some kind of sage within Judaism. Buddhism and Hinduism, Jesus is just another guru, enlightened figure. So they're all making different truth claims, right? But we can look at the evidence and we can ask what is the best evidence, and we can arrive to a conclusion, right? So don't buy into what Hitchens is saying here, that we just can't know. Maybe he doesn't want to know. I don't know. So what happens is God decides to execute his authority, and he delegates his authority by giving us a text. And we read the text, we open the Bible, it's as if God is speaking to us personally, right? This is his authority. He is an authority, and this is his authoritative word. So hopefully in reading the word, we realize this is God communicating, right? I don't need to ask God to tell me what to do sometimes because he's communicated through a text. I don't need God to always tell me. Speak to me, God, tell me. Well, read the text, okay? Because most of his plans are in the text. Not every little detail. No, he doesn't tell us who to marry. He doesn't tell us what job to take and tell us necessarily whether we should work out at Planet Fitness or Lifetime Fitness or whether we should go to this grocery store or that grocery store and what car to buy. I mean, no. It doesn't give us every little detail, but the point is, though, that it gives us moral guidelines about a lot of things. And God gives us our minds and gives us the ability to make decisions based on good discernment and based on our walking with him. Sometimes we can just know what to do. Other times he gives us the freedom to make choices. If you're walking around thinking God has to tell you what to do all the time, you're going to be an infant in your faith for many years. Okay. God wants you to eventually grow up and make decisions. You may say, well, that sounds like you don't want him to give you wisdom. No, you can ask for wisdom. James 1:5 says ask for wisdom, but don't expect God to personally tell you everything to do. Okay, that's like me raising my kids, and I want them to be responsible adults and make decisions. That's like them walking up to me every single time the rest of their lives, asking me to tell them what to do at age 24, 25, 28, 35, 82. Now, sure, they can ask me, but a lot of decisions, I'm going to tell them it's time for them to make decisions. You know what I mean? And hopefully they've matured enough that they're able to make moral decisions. I hope. Or I make some wrong decisions. That's the way life goes. But what God does is he picks a spokesman, right, to communicate to humans. He deputizes them, and he did that with the person of the Messiah, and he communicates to humans through an individual, and that, of course, is Jesus. And that brings up the issue of miracles, because the question is, how do you know this person is a really authentic messenger? How do you know that this person is really sent from God? What is he just like, not like, what makes him different from Muhammad and Buddha and Krishna and all these other religious leaders, these famous founders of different world religions? Well, Lewis said, C.S. Lewis, if God exists, miracles are possible. Obviously, if God exists, miracles are possible. And what God decides to do is he certifies his messengers. When God's going to do something through a specific individual, he's a true spokesman for God. He does the miracles through that prophet to authenticate who they are. He did it through Moses. Moses said, they're not going to listen to me. And then God says, I'll give you the signs to do. And Moses does these signs, right, to prove he's sent from God. He really came from God. And God does the same thing with Jesus. Nicodemus comes to him and says, we know you're a teacher from God. No one can perform these miraculous signs if God was not with them. The book of John is actually called the book of signs sometimes, by all the word sign in there. So God does miracles through Jesus. He authenticates who Jesus is through the miracles he does, right? Jesus couldn't just show up on the scene in the first century, be like, hi, I'm the Messiah, believe in me. No, he has to do things to prove he's the Messiah. He has to authenticate who he is. He does those miracles for a very specific reason. So it goes like this. If the New Testament authors told the truth, which I think they did, then Jesus, of course, is the Son of God who offers forgiveness for our sins. Premise 2, the New Testament authors told the truth. The conclusion is Jesus is the Son of God who offers forgiveness. Now, I've done other talks on the reliability of the New Testament. We're not doing that tonight. If you missed it, I'm sorry. And Gary Habermas, who is a well-known Christian apologist, he debated Anthony Flew a long time ago. Anthony Flew was a famous atheist. And Flew actually became a believer in some kind of God before he died. Not necessarily, he didn't believe in Jesus, but he believed in some sort of generic God. So he came out of his atheism somewhat. But nothing to really celebrate big time, because he did not really ever make a profession of faith in the Messiah. But Gary Habermas debated him, and Flew agreed that if Jesus rose from the dead, then this is the best evidence to show that the God of the Bible is the one true God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the one true God. Okay? So the resurrection is what sets Jesus apart as well from anybody else. Of course, he's totally different. He's risen. He's alive forever. We have a question of the day we do at Ohio State sometimes. Do you believe in an afterlife? And some people come by and like, well, how would you know? I don't know if you can know there's an afterlife. My response is, what if someone has the authority to tell us what the afterlife is like? What if there's somebody who's been given the authority to speak to humans about what happens when we die? And of course, that leads to a conversation about Jesus and his resurrection. Because if a guy rises from the dead, I'm going to listen to what he has to say about the afterlife. Okay? That's just a general rule I follow, as my friend Frank Turek says, by the way. And then finally, revelatory medium number 5. God reveals himself to humanity through a messenger, through us. God speaks through a person using the text, maybe using the Bible to communicate, maybe using it through a pastor, a sermon, a teacher, or an individual evangelist, a personal encounter with somebody, a friend, a relative, whatever. That person could be seen, of course, as visual communication. You can talk to the person. That's what we do. And we, of course, are commissioned to do that. We're commissioned to tell people about the gospel. And Paul says in Romans 10 that, people they come to faith by hearing the word. And how are they going to hear unless someone's sent? So, of course, missionary calling and verbal proclamation is one of the main ways God reveals himself to humanity. That's why that if you study the Bible, you will see that it's pretty clear that God is a sending God. Okay? God is the one who sends the Messiah into the world. The Son is the one who sends the Holy Spirit. And the Spirit is the one who sends us. Right? Jesus sends the Spirit to come and dwell us, who is another Jesus, and he authorizes us, gives us the authority to go and make disciples, right? That's why when we share the gospel, we go and share the gospel, we're going under the authority of Jesus, and we have the Holy Spirit empowering us, right? Okay? You don't have to worry about, well, I got to do it myself. Oh my gosh, you're not going to understand what I'm saying. Oh my gosh, I'm going to fail. Oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Oh my gosh, I. Too much focus on yourself. Remember, you have the Holy Spirit with you, okay? The same Holy Spirit that was with the apostles, okay? He will enable you, and he will be with you, and he's the one that convicts them of their need for the gospel. Whether he chooses to convict them is not up to you, okay? All right, so that's about it. 5 ways, let's review. So God has revealed himself through visual communication, through the gift of creation, which has all those different effects we see of God's existence in the world. We observe the effects. We reason back to a cause. We have another visual communication God uses through observing humans' moral reactions. They appeal to moral law, right? That they appeal to every day. Then we have written communication, and also visual communication with the Bible and the coming of Jesus, coming of the Messiah, and then, of course, written and visual communication with messengers. Okay? So people can reject all those mediums, by the way. They can reject all 5. They can reject the effects of God in the world. They can just say, I think it's just, they can go back to this, and they can just say right here, they can say, no God, it's just a natural explanation. We're just the result of an undirected natural process. I'm an accident of nature, and that's the way it is. I'm going to make the most out of my life. I don't care. They can reject God and creation. They can reject the moral laws pointing back to God. They can just try to make up their own morality. They can reject the Bible, of course. They can reject who Jesus is, and they can reject you as a messenger if they want to. That's why God has built a tremendous amount of freedom into the creation. People can exercise their own choice. And he makes things a little ambiguous, a little ambiguous because I don't think he wants to be totally avert. If he was totally avert in who he was to humans, it wouldn't give him any freedom to pick to want to be in a relationship with him. That's why he gives them a little breathing room to decide if they want to respond to those 5 mediums, right? He gives them the room to reject or accept. Okay? All right. The Ohio State University. You are correct. Steve, the Ohio State University. Oh, I have to stop recording. Sorry.